So let's talk about something that's been absolutely wild to follow over the past year. There's a new phone on the market, well, sort of. It's called the T1. It's made by a company called Trump Mobile, and it has been one of the most chaotic product launches in recent memory. And right in the middle of all of this chaos sits Apple. Not launching the phone, not selling the phone, not even really acknowledging the phone, but somehow, inevitably, getting dragged into the conversation anyway. Because when you try to position your product as an alternative to the iPhone, Apple doesn't need to say a word. The comparison does the work for them. Let's go back to where this all started, because the origin story here matters. Back in June of 2025, Trump Mobile, a wireless carrier that was partly launched by Donald Trump's sons, Don Jr. and Eric, announced they were going to sell a smartphone. Not just any smartphone, a gold-colored American flag emblazoned device that would be the patriotic answer to what they framed as the problem of big tech. The pitch was simple and emotionally charged. Apple and Samsung make their phones overseas. We're going to make ours in America. This is the phone for real Americans. Buy in now, put down your deposit, and be part of something bigger than a product launch. Now, if you've been in the tech space for a while, your eyebrows probably went up immediately when you heard that. Making a smartphone in America is not just an ambitious goal. It is, at the current state of global supply chains, genuinely one of the most complicated manufacturing challenges imaginable. The components, the chips, the display panels, the camera sensors, these are produced through decades of deeply specialized infrastructure that exists primarily in Asia. Apple, with all its money, all its influence, all its negotiating power, has spent years and billions of dollars even partially shifting some of its assembly to India and Vietnam. And the T1 was promising to beat them all by going full domestic from a brand new company for $499. The tech community was skeptical within hours, and honestly, it didn't take long for that skepticism to be proven right. Almost immediately after Trump Mobile's website went live, people on the internet started doing what the internet does best. Reverse image, searching the renders, cross-referencing the hardware specs, digging through supply chain databases. And what they found was about as unsurprising as it was damning. The T1, based on everything visible, appeared to be a rebadged budget Android device manufactured in China. The very country, the very supply chain model that Trump Mobile was positioning itself against. The renders shown on the website were traced back to an existing Chinese handset. The specs were mediocre at best. The gold finish and the American flag were real. Everything else seemed borrowed. And here's what's remarkable about that discovery. It didn't stop people from pre-ordering, not even close. Over the following months, an estimated 590,000 people put down a $100 deposit to reserve a T1. That's nearly $60 million in deposits for a phone that, at the time, hadn't been built, wasn't certified, and had just been publicly exposed as probably not made in the USA. That tells you something really important, not just about the Trump brand, but about the way emotion drives consumer decisions in ways that specs and benchmarks never fully capture. These weren't just customers buying a phone, they were making a statement. Meanwhile, Trump Mobile quietly did something that should have been a much bigger story. They removed the Made in America language from their website. No announcement, no press release, no clarification. It just disappeared. If you were paying attention, you noticed. If you weren't, you missed it entirely. The company said nothing, the pre-orders kept coming, and the phone still didn't ship. This is where the story starts to get genuinely strange, because the delays that followed were not normal product launch delays. They weren't the kind of thing where a company says, we hit a manufacturing snag, we're pushing the date back 6 weeks, here's what we're fixing. The T1's release date moved like a ghost. First, it was supposed to ship in August 2025, then November, then December. Then Q1 of 2026 came and went. In April 2026, Trump Mobile quietly redesigned their website and removed the release date entirely, replacing it with a link to join the waitlist. At some point, a customer service representative told a journalist the phone was in the final stages of certification and field testing in January of 2026, nearly 8 months after the original announcement. There was a moment in early 2026 where Trump Mobile tried to explain the delays by pointing to a federal government shutdown. The shutdown, they suggested, had impacted their timeline. Tech analysts and journalists pointed out, fairly inaccurately, that a privately held hardware company launching a consumer smartphone should have essentially zero dependency on the federal government staying open. It's not like the FCC closes its doors and no phones can be certified. The explanation didn't hold up to even light scrutiny, and the coverage reflected that. But here's where it gets legally interesting. Because in April 2026, Trump Mobile also updated their terms of service. And the new language was, to put it charitably, alarming for anyone who had put down a deposit. The updated terms stated that the $100 deposit was not a guarantee that customers would receive a device. Instead, it explained that the deposit only provided and I want to get this right, a conditional opportunity to purchase the phone if Trump Mobile actually put it on sale. It didn't lock in a price, it didn't lock in the specs, it wasn't a binding sales contract. You gave them $100, and in return you got the possibility of maybe buying a phone someday at a price and with features to be determined later, assuming the phone ever existed in a form you could purchase. That is an extraordinary thing to put in your terms of service, and it speaks to how precarious the whole enterprise had become by the spring of 2026. Legal experts started asking questions. Consumer protection advocates started paying attention. And still, somehow, the phones hadn't shipped. And then, on May 13th, 2026, Trump Mobile posted a tweet that sounded like a victory lap. The T1 phone has arrived. Those who pre-ordered the T1 phone will be receiving an update email. Phones start shipping this week. 3 exclamation marks. The energy of a company that had just crossed the finish line after a very long race. Reports came out that the first units had been assembled in the United States. USA Today was told as much by the company directly. But here's the thing. Sources within the supply chain and journalists who looked more closely at the situation clarified something important. The assembly happening in the United States was cosmetic. Final assembly, in this context, meant attaching the faceplate, boxing the phone, maybe applying a sticker. The actual hardware, the chipset, the display, the cameras, the battery, the circuit boards, none of that was domestic. The phone itself, in any meaningful technical sense, was not made in America. The gold finish was American. The packaging might have been American. But the device was, as the internet had suspected from day one, a product of overseas manufacturing dressed up in patriotic branding. So let's bring Apple into this properly, because up to this point, Apple has been hovering in the background of every single one of these conversations without ever actually saying anything. And that's kind of the point. Apple doesn't have to say anything. When Trump Mobile announced the T1 as an alternative to Apple and Samsung, they invited the comparison themselves. And every subsequent development, the delays, the rebadge allegations, the removed Made in America claim, the deposit terms update, the cosmetic-only domestic assembly, every single one of those developments has played out against the backdrop of what a real smartphone launch looks like. Apple, for all the criticism it receives, and there is legitimate criticism to be made about pricing, about repairability, about ecosystem lock-in, knows how to ship a product. They announce it, they build it, they ship it, and it works. The iPhone 17 lineup launched on schedule. The iPhone 17e launched at a specific price with specific specs. You could walk into a store and buy one. That is, at its core, the baseline expectation for a consumer electronics product. And the T1 failed to meet that baseline for the better part of a year. What's genuinely fascinating from a tech perspective is the hardware comparison, because this is where things get almost poetic. Apple's iPhone 17e, their entry-level device for 2026, starts at around $499, the same price as the T1. And the iPhone 17e is, by every measurable benchmark, a vastly superior piece of hardware. The A-series chip inside it outperforms the processor in the T1 by a margin that isn't even close. The camera system is better, the software ecosystem, the security, the update cadence, the resale value, all of it is in a different league. And remember, Apple is also the company that's being pressured to move manufacturing to America, the company accused of building phones overseas, the company that Trump Mobile was supposedly offering an alternative to. The T1 costs the same as Apple's most affordable new iPhone and delivers a fraction of the experience. But Apple Insider put it even more brutally than that. They pointed out that Amazon was selling a renewed iPhone 14, a phone from 2022, for around $305. Trump Mobile's T1 was going for $480 on pre-order. A 2-year-old refurbished iPhone outclasses the T1 on performance, software support, camera quality, and long-term usability. And it costs less. So if you were a value-conscious buyer looking for an affordable smartphone and you weren't making a political statement with your purchase, the math here was not complicated. Now, the broader Apple story in 2026 is also worth understanding in this context, because Apple isn't having an easy year either, and the Trump phone drama is happening against a backdrop of real political and economic pressure on Tim Cook and the company he built into the world's most valuable. Trump has been going after Apple directly and aggressively over the question of iPhone manufacturing. In a Truth Social post from last year, Trump was explicit. He expected iPhones sold in America to be built in America, not India, not anywhere else. And if that wasn't the case, a tariff of at least 25% would be applied. That is a significant threat to a company that was already taking a $900 million tariff hit in a single quarter. Trump made it even more personal during a trip to Qatar, where he told reporters he had spoken directly with Tim Cook about this. "I've treated you very good," Trump reportedly said to Cook, "but now I hear you're building all over India. We are not interested in you building in India. India can take care of themselves. We want you to build here." Apple, characteristically, did not immediately respond to requests for comment. But the pressure was real, the financial stakes were enormous. And yet, here's the irony that the tech community has been chewing on. Trump is simultaneously pressuring Apple to manufacture domestically while his own sons are selling a phone that, despite all its America First branding, is being assembled overseas. The standard being applied to Apple, build it here or pay the price, is not being applied to Trump Mobile. The T1 gets credit for some cosmetic final assembly on U.S. soil. Apple gets threatened with tariffs despite investing hundreds of billions of dollars in American infrastructure and pledging to shift significant production to domestic or allied facilities. The asymmetry is glaring, and it has not gone unnoticed. Tim Cook, for his part, has been navigating this situation with the kind of careful diplomatic positioning that has defined his tenure at Apple. He presented Trump with a 24-karat gold plaque around the time Apple received a significant tariff exemption. He pledged to invest $500 billion in the United States over the coming years. He has, by all accounts, worked hard to maintain a relationship with the administration, while also quietly continuing to shift production to India and Vietnam, which is the only realistic path forward given the current state of global manufacturing. The idea of building iPhones entirely in America is not impossible, but it would require years of infrastructure development, a workforce with specialized skills that doesn't currently exist at the necessary scale, and a price tag on the finished product that would make today's iPhone prices look like a bargain. Analysts have suggested that a fully American-made iPhone could retail for somewhere between $500 and $3,500, depending on how you model the supply chain shift. The T1, by contrast, promised to sidestep all of that complexity. It would be American, it would be affordable, and it would be a statement. And what it turned out to be was a rebranded budget Android phone with a gold finish, a flag on the back, and a release date that moved every few months for nearly a year. When it finally started shipping in May 2026, the reaction from customers was not celebratory. People were unhappy about the manufacturing origins, about the specs, about the design, about the months of waiting, the constantly shifting terms of their deposit. The phone that was supposed to be a proud alternative to big tech had arrived looking like exactly what the critics said it was from the beginning. There's a version of this story where you could feel some sympathy for Trump Mobile's ambitions. Launching a new smartphone brand is genuinely hard. The hardware supply chain is brutal. Certification takes time. Building brand awareness in a market dominated by Apple and Samsung is a multi-year project. If Trump Mobile had been upfront about the challenges, honest about the timeline, transparent about where the hardware was coming from, and priced the phone as the entry-level Android device it actually is, rather than the patriotic flagship it was marketed as, maybe the conversation would be different, but that's not what happened. What happened was a launch built on claims that quickly unraveled, followed by months of silence and delay, followed by deposit terms that protected the company while leaving. Customers exposed, followed by a shipping announcement built on a definition of American assembly that doesn't pass even casual scrutiny. And all of that is played out in full public view, with every development being compared, whether Trump Mobile invited the comparison or not, to the company that has set the standard for how you bring a smartphone to market. Apple is not perfect. The iPhone is not for everyone. The price is high, the ecosystem is closed, the repairability is limited. These are real criticisms that the tech community takes seriously. But Apple builds the product it says it will build, ships it when it says it will ship, and delivers the experience it promises. That's not a small thing. In the context of what the T1 has been over the past year, it looks like an enormous thing. What's left now is the long tail of the story. Hundreds of thousands of people are waiting for phones that are now shipping, but the question of whether those phones will live up to even the modest expectations that remain is very much open. The tech reviewers who get their hands on T1 units will benchmark it, test the cameras, evaluate the software, and the results will be what the results will be. The political energy that drove $59 million in deposits will be hard to sustain when the hardware reality sets in. And Apple will keep doing what Apple does, announcing products, shipping them on time, iterating, improving, and quietly letting the market decide. The Trump T1 phone is many things. It's a political product, masquerading as a tech product. It's a case study in how brand loyalty can override consumer logic. It's a reminder that launching hardware is hard and that made in America is a marketing claim that demands serious scrutiny before you accept it at face value. And it is, perhaps most interestingly, an accidental advertisement for Apple. Not because Apple paid for it, not because Apple did anything, but because when you spend a year trying to build something to compete with the iPhone and this is what you come up with, the comparison writes itself. The gold finish is nice though, you have to give them that. But let's zoom out even further. Because the T1 story doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a much bigger cultural moment where technology, politics, and identity have become completely intertwined in ways that would have seemed bizarre even a decade Ego. The smartphone used to be a tool. It was a device you chose based on what it could do for you. How fast it was, how good the camera was, how long the battery lasted, how well the software worked. Those were the questions that mattered. And to a large segment of the market, they still are. But there is now a growing portion of the consumer electronics conversation where the politics of who makes the phone, who profits from it, what values the company represents, all of that sits alongside or even above the hardware specs in the purchase decision. Apple navigated this for years by being a kind of neutral premium brand. You bought Apple because it was well designed and well made, and the company's politics largely stayed out of the conversation. Samsung was the Android alternative for people who wanted more control or a bigger screen or a lower price point. Google made phones for the people who wanted the pure Android experience. The market had its lanes, and the lanes were defined mostly by features and price. The T1 is trying to carve out a lane that's defined entirely by something else, by who you are, what you believe, and what side of the culture you're on. And that's genuinely new territory for consumer smartphones. Even if it isn't new for other product categories, we've seen political polarization drive consumer choices in food and entertainment and social media platforms. The idea that it would eventually reach smartphones was probably inevitable. What's interesting is how the execution has gone. Because if you're going to build a phone for a political identity, the phone still has to work. The political energy can drive the initial wave of interest, the deposits, the social media buzz, but the moment someone picks up that device and uses it as a daily driver, the experience is going to be evaluated on the same terms as every other phone. Does it take good photos? Does it run smoothly? Does the battery last a full day? Does it get security updates? Will apps be supported on it 2 years from now? These questions don't care about politics. They're just the questions you ask about a phone. And on those questions, the T1, based on everything we know about its hardware, is going to struggle. A budget Android chip running a lightly customized version of Android is not going to compete with Apple's Silicon, which is widely regarded as the most powerful processor ever put in a consumer smartphone. The camera system is not going to match an iPhone at the same price point, let alone outperform it. The software update cadence, how long the device gets security patches and OS upgrades, is almost certainly going to be shorter than what Apple offers, which supports devices for years longer than most Android manufacturers. For someone who buys the T1 as a daily driver expecting it to hold up over time, there are real questions about how that experience plays out. This is also worth saying. None of this means Apple is beyond criticism. The company has real issues that the tech community debates constantly. The iPhone lineup has gotten extremely expensive at the high end, with flagship models pushing past $200 and Pro models going even further. Apple's decision to keep key features exclusive to newer hardware, even when older devices have the processing power to support them, frustrates users who have spent a lot of money on devices that feel artificially limited. The app. Store's commission structure and its policies around competing payment systems have been at the center of ongoing antitrust battles in the US, Europe, and elsewhere. And while Apple's privacy story is genuinely strong, relative to many competitors, it is not without complexity, particularly when you consider the company's relationship with China, which remains both a manufacturing hub and a major sales market. So this isn't a story about Apple being perfect. It's a story about what happens when a competitor enters the space with enormous brand energy behind it, but without the operational foundation to back up its promises. The gap between what the T1 was, marketed as, and what it actually turned out to be is not a small gap. It's a wide canyon. And crossing that canyon requires not just political enthusiasm, but supply chain expertise, hardware engineering, software development, carrier relationships, regulatory approvals, customer support infrastructure, everything that takes years to build even for companies with unlimited resources. Trump Mobile doesn't appear to have had any of that built out before they started taking deposits. And the customers who put down $100 based on renderings and promises have now spent nearly a year finding out what that means in practice. Some of them will get their phones and be happy with them. Some will get their phones and be disappointed. Some will feel that the statement they made by pre-ordering was worth it regardless of the hardware experience. And some will want their money back and find that the terms they agreed to make that harder than it should be. The tech media has been watching all of this unfold with a mix of genuine journalistic interest and something that, if we're honest, looks a lot like disbelief. Product launches fail, startups overpromise and underdeliver. That's not unusual. But the scale of the pre-order numbers, over 500,000 deposits, nearly $60 million, combined with the brazenness of the Made in America claim and the subsequent quiet retreat from that claim, combined with the revised deposit terms that stripped away customer protections, combined with the months of unexplained silence, the T1 launch has been a genuinely remarkable sequence of events. And then, against all of this, you have Apple. Not reacting, not scrambling, not holding a press conference to compare specs, just continuing to do what it does, shipping products, iterating on hardware, navigating the politics of the tariff environment as best it can. Tim Cook presenting Trump with a gold plaque and pledging hundreds of billions in U.S. investment while quietly continuing to manufacture in India and Vietnam, because that's where the supply chain actually exists. The optics are complicated. The business logic is clear. In the end, what the Trump T1 phone has revealed, perhaps more clearly than anything else in recent memory, is that making a smartphone is hard. Not just technically hard, though it is that, but hard in every dimension. The supply chain, the software, the regulatory environment, the carrier relationships, the customer service, the update cadence, the competitive pricing. Apple has spent over 15 years building the infrastructure to do this at scale and still faces enormous pressure from every direction. The idea that a new entrant could simply declare they were building an American phone and have it arrive on doorsteps within a few months was never realistic. The people who believed it wanted to believe it, and wanting to believe something is powerful, but it doesn't build phones.